He's sitting there sort of away from the madding crowd that's stampeding up and down the aisles. And actually, he's trying to sort of isolate himself because, in fact, shortly he will be isolated for a long period of time in the lonely north.
Just about the time that I was finishing off my thesis on Knob Lake, the phone rang, and Dr. Sven Orvig, then with the Department of Geography at McGill, asked me if I'd like to go north on an Arctic expedition. And of course, being English, I said yes. There are several traditions of Arctic expeditions. The English tradition is where everybody puts 50 pounds in the pot and sort of hires husky dogs from Greenland and lives on Bovril and Ovaltine and this sort of thing. And then there's the American tradition where you have a massive before operations report and a massive after operations report, but very little in the middle. I was to undergo an American Arctic expedition, and I use the term undergo as of an operation advisedly. So Sven Orvig phoned me up, said, "Do you want to go on an Arctic expedition?" And I said, "Well, certainly." And I was even sort of tickled to death to find out they were going to pay me for this. Memory, of course, tends to cast a pall over our worst and best experiences, but looking back at this is one of the experiences of my life. A group of men isolated, each trusting the other and each respecting the other, a small community in isolation. And it's not just sort of a touch of the old nostalgia, it's a feeling of having participated in something very meaningful, both personally and professionally.
You know what one young fellow told me that was taking, I forget what he was taking, probably philosophy. He said this was the myth of Sisyphus. As a matter of fact, he lisped, but I didn't, I think. And the fact is that he had quite a time with it, and here was some wretched, was it a king? Was it a king? Yes. A king of Greece, Corinth. Well, it might have been Corinth. And here he was rolling this confounded rock up to the top of this precipice for some reason or other. And then he let gravity take over, and there it hit the bottom, and he did the same thing again, no doubt with a larger rock.
I went back to the north with an American expedition to northern Ellesmere Island. This was to the ice shelf of northern Ellesmere Island, even further north than I'd been in 57 and 58. Now, this was a fairly ghastly experience. I always remember that on the Canadian expedition, we'd eaten dried meats and this sort of thing, and we'd enjoyed ourselves, you know. Somebody says, well, you know, when you go on these Arctic expeditions, don't you start missing women? Well, after about the first month, and then you start talking about food. Remember once I had American private first class with me as an assistant. At least I think he was working for me. And they dropped one of the tracks, and they also very kindly dropped us some lettuce and some tomatoes. And I said, my goodness, look at this. Fresh vegetables. And he said, no salad dressing. Anyhow, the whole thing was a shambles and a mess. The scientific results were minimal. The whole experience was rather frustrating and disagreeable. Of course, it may have been me, I accept this, about the North. And I was worried about whether it's you or whether it's the country, the other people.
Well, is this a surprise? No, it's no surprise at all. The person that makes the trip, more often, of course, is going to realize that before long he's going to be up against himself. Not against his fellow travelers, no, so much, but he's going to have to be up against his own sad self.
I'd always sort of wanted to work with people in the North. And in 1960, I transferred to the Department of Northern Affairs and National Resources as a community planning officer. The first thing I was asked to undertake was a study of the squatters of Whitehorse. These were a group of people who ultimately, at least in my own work, turned out to be a key to the way that the North is viewed in Canada, and the way the North can and may and has developed.
Well,
these people had
somehow the sameness of a trip in and a trip out is part of this endless feeling that we are up against this myth, this business of having to do things for no apparent reason. Fine. You say to yourself, well, which of these people I've seen now am I going to say hello to? Well, it isn't as though you've lasted that long. You've said hello to half a dozen, maybe 15. But you had no intention to, sort of establish, what is that they call it? Rapport with anyone in particular. Now you find it necessary. Isn't that funny? You find it necessary. Why, in fact?
Well, I did this study and I came back alive, shattering the myth of the wicked squatters who wouldn't talk to anybody from Ottawa. Of course, they hate Ottawa in the north. They just loathe Ottawa.
I guess my love affair with the north went back about, more than 15 years. I was in the East Bloc then, as a young officer in the Department of External Affairs. And in the course of my work, it gradually sort of bore into me that Canadians were, well, if not throwing away their north for a mess of pottage, at least being supremely oblivious to the responsibilities we had to the people there, and I suppose oblivious, too, to the resources, the wealth that we could get from it. We just didn't care about the north. There was a great sort of terra nullius. And I got kind of frustrated about this, and naturally more and more anxious that we in the government should do something about our responsibilities in the north.
And I came back alive and brought back the list of the people, and from that time on I was entitled to call myself a northern expert. Again, the joke about the word expert being derived from two words, ex meaning formerly and spurt meaning a drip under pressure, is by no means inappropriate in the north. Really, as a matter of fact, you can't talk about the north until you've got out of it. So the definition is not all that incorrect.
Well, the end of 1953 was the beginning of the sort of administrative revolution in the north. Now, not everything started then. A lot of things had started before, and a lot of things were far from starting. But at least there was the focus of the department, and it was decided to make a new investment in the north.
Well, then I did a series of what you call quick and dirty studies. I was up in Inuvik and I wrote a wrong report with a very large number of recommendations. Again, this is par for the course in the north. You come from Ottawa, you go in the north, you write a report, you make a list of recommendations, you bring it back to Ottawa, and nobody pays any attention to it.
It wasn't an easy decision. But eventually I decided that I would sit for a competition for a job in Northern Affairs. And therefore, in 1954, on April Fool's Day, if the truth were known, I moved over and changed my life, as you might say, and then did something serious about the love affair with the North.
In 1962 to 66, I spent the summers in the Yukon. I mounted a Yukon research project, started wondering about the future of Whitehorse, started looking at the future of the Yukon, then from there the future of the North, and the future of North America, and the future of the world. I sort of kind of stopped there. This brought me, literally, oh blessed man, in contact with Buckminster Fuller.
He had to tell somebody this business about his research and his hopes, and he's a young fellow and so forth and so on. You don't want to, smash his dream before it has dimensions,
what sort of a world we're in, and secondly, what sort of a world we're moving into. The other thing, of course, about the North is it is an oral society. There is a great stress laid on messages passed.
Because he's got one of these social scientific minds. I feel embarrassed at telling him or suggesting to him that there's something more than figures and quantitative things and measurable things that enter into the whole picture of how you get along with yourself, or if you get along with yourself. It seems to me that a man by the name of Pascal years back said that most of mankind's troubles would be over with or done away with if he would stay in his own room. At the time I thought this was such a self-evident, banal, a sort of silly thing to say that I gave it little thought. But then on looking back, perhaps after a few decades, I thought to myself, how indeed true this is. Can a man get along with himself, usually, in this solitary life of the hermit north, or the solitary life of any place where he secludes himself?
Well, I didn't think it was eccentric to go north. Many people who knew me thought it was. They couldn't see my point at all. They didn't think it was a country for a woman, especially for a single woman, because they thought about the social life there and thought that when a woman reaches a certain age, she should be far more concerned with trying to trap a man than with making a career for herself or with trying to face the world by herself.
I think it takes a strong person to live in the North and really to be a part of it and to find satisfaction there. When you're living in the big city in the South, you can always retreat. When you fail in your relations with society, you can just go away and nobody really knows the difference. You can't go away when you're in a little village 1,000 miles from nowhere and a couple of weeks from the next plane, high in the Arctic.
You can only leave with the knowledge of many other people. You can't say, I'll take the weekend off and I'll go to the next motel and I'm not to be disturbed. This is impossible.
And so all sorts of curious things happen. In some ways, you may have gone to the north to get away from society, and you find yourself far closer to it than you've ever been in your life. You know your neighbors intimately. You know each walk they take down that little 500-yard road. You know what their problems are because they're bound to talk to you about them. If they don't, they'll go nuts just as you'll go nuts when you don't talk.
It just isn't possible to escape from gossip, for instance. We at Coral Harbor knew what was going on at Baker Lake or at Eskimo Point or Rankin Inlet, not by official communication, but because it all came more or less by a grapevine. It was absolutely impossible to keep anything from anybody, even if we had a party they knew it down in Winnipeg.
And yet, the kind of people you have chosen as your friends and associates in that particular village, in that sort of desert island of the north, if you like, are not people that you've really chosen at all.